You need winners? Let the Sports Advisor show you how to make money. General Manager Al DeMarco, a former sports reporter and contributor on Fox Sports, MSNBC, and Comcast Sports TV, brings over 25 years of handicapping experience to the table. Rick Torino, a 25-year handicapping expert, spent over a decade as a college and pro football editor at a national wire service. Together, they are the Sports Advisors, your number one source for winners.
While the college football season is quickly winding down, here we are in week number 12. We've got 6 of the best games to break down for you. Hi, everyone. Al DeMarco here, along with Rick Torino. And before we go any further, props once again to Rick, now 9-1 with his college football best bets on Saturday. I've always said, you win on Saturday, it's the most important day because it sets you up for the weekend ahead. And last Saturday, here on the show, we talked about one of the games that Rick ultimately used for his best bet. It was the ACC showdown between North Carolina and Wake Forest. I was on Wake Forest. You were on North Carolina. We always talk about the games that we are going to choose to discuss, but we never actually discuss the games in advance. So it's always a surprise to me what you are going to use. But I'll tell you what, North Carolina is living a charmed life with all these road wins, 6-0 on the road. And I think the total margin of victory for those 6 outright winners, I believe, is 22 points on the year. But props to you for another winner.
Thanks again, Alan. Before we go further, I'll just say that we do have another big selection coming out Saturday, but will be different than from any of our 6 games that we're doing tonight. So just wanted to just wanted to give our viewers a heads up. It will be another big one Saturday, but not any of these 6 games. I'm zoning in on a couple of games right now. So, but we'll discuss that. They'll see the plays on Saturday. What did I want to tell you, Al? Yes, what a turnaround for Carolina on the road. Do you know Al last year did not win a game on the road? Did not win a game on the road. 6 road games this year, won them all. And I'll tell you what, Al, that Drake May, boy, I just fall in love with him more and more each week. And I know we're looking ahead for a couple weeks, but I think they're going to give Clemson a good game in that ACC title game. I mean, the line's up already. They're a 6-point underdog, but we'll get more into that game in 2 weeks.
Well, we talked about him last week here on the show, and him, of course, being Drake May. I just thought that here is a guy who is actually flying under the radar, a guy who's having a great year throwing the ball, a guy who is also North Carolina's leading rusher, but really isn't getting a lot of Heisman hype when you consider the hype that is going to C.J. Stroud of Oklahoma, to Bryce Young, to Caleb Williams out at USC. But the guy is just having a phenomenal statistical season. And if not for him, that North Carolina team is maybe a 500 squad at best.
Yeah, absolutely right, Al. Some of the throws he made last week were just unbelievable. I was on that one from start to finish. A little palm sweaty for anybody that played that game. That was a little palm sweater there. But we made it through. We cashed in. Couple of things, Al, from this past weekend. You know, over the last couple of weeks, we've taken a look at some of these under-the-radar teams. For example, JMU, we put the curse on them. We liked Tulane.
You put the curse on James Madison. I had nothing to do with it, folks.
We were all on board with Tulane last week. They go down. Didn't even get the cover. Well, they were favored. They made Central Florida look like they should be in the top 10. This week, Al, I got another team that we're probably going to jinx, but what a job Jim Mora has done at Connecticut. Oh, my gosh, is a 13-point underdog last week, beat Liberty outright. Now, Al, going into Army, they're a 10-point underdog again against an under 500 Army team.
Well, I got to figure with Army, it's so hard to prepare for that triple option attack that the academies run. And, you know, last week, if you look at the box score, they did not play that well against Liberty. The Flames actually outgained them in terms of total yardage, but they were a very opportunistic team. And plus, I think they also caught Liberty coming off the big road upset of Arkansas. So it was a perfect storm in terms of opportunities, and U.Conn took advantage of it. But a great turnaround, nonetheless, by Jim Mora taking on a U.Conn program that pretty much has been dead for a decade.
Decade. What a job he's done. That pro. I mean, you remember, Al, they were talking about dropping down to 1AA. They were talking about discontinuing the program, but what a job. It's just amazing to get to 6-5 and maybe send it. I hope they go to a bowl. They're bowl eligible, not necessarily meaning they're going to get to a bowl, but they certainly deserve one. That's for sure. And you know, Al, just a couple other notes. Two dogs that really barked last week, Al. Boston College getting 18, wins at North Carolina State, Al. 800, they were plus 800 on the money line, and they won the game outright. And then the other one, if anyone stayed up late for it, was that Arizona game against UCLA. I don't know how that was just another one, catching 18, catching 20. Arizona was catching 20, and another 820 plus favorite on the money line. It's just, you know, that Pac-12, Al, just kicked themselves in the rear end last week, you know, with the Oregon losing, UCLA losing. They could have been primed for a big doubleheader weekend this Saturday, and they just fall on their face again, that poor Pac-12.
Well, those are the two last games that we're going to talk about. Among today's games we're going to break down, those being UCLA and USC and Oregon and Utah. But let's start off with our favorite team, our boys from TCU, the Horned Frogs. They're going to be in Waco taking on Baylor. I broke with tradition last week for the first time all season. I went against TCU. And I was wrong, and I watched that game. And let me tell you something, that was a dominant defensive performance by the Horned Frogs in Austin against Texas last week. The Longhorns couldn't get anything done, and TCU imposed their will, not only defensively but offensively. What a great all-around performance by TCU.
Yeah, Al, like you said, that defense, which nobody thought they were going to play the game like they did Saturday night, they held Bijan Robinson to 29 yards and 199 yards of total offense. Just a dominating performance. The offense didn't look that great, Al, but the way that defense played, and our boy, Keandre Miller, went over 100 yards again. You know, the most underrated back in the country he's got to be. Again, they're not giving TCU much credit. 2.5 on the road. I mean, they're begging you to take TCU. We got to go with them again, Al. I don't know. 6-1 straight up, 5-2 against the spread against Baylor since 2015. I mean, in TCU, they've been a moneymaker for whoever's taken them. And listen to us, Al, over the last couple of weeks. You know, they're 8-1-1 this year, 4-0-1 on the road against the spread. Yeah, I'm going TCU again, Al. 2.5. They're, you know, we thought something was wrong last week getting 7.5, but we're going TCU again.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, you lost faith in TCU, and I was on them. Last week, the roles were reversed. You were back in the Horned Frogs. I jumped off the bandwagon. This week, we're both back on, and I'm with you. I'm going to go with TCU because Baylor absolutely was pathetic last week after the two big road wins. And I say road wins in terms of big with the quotes around it, the air quotes, because in retrospect, beating a bad Texas Tech team in Lubbock 45-17, and then Oklahoma, a team that once again laid another egg last week at West Virginia 38-35. But then you're coming home and you're taking on Kansas State, and Kansas State dominated you. I have to use that word again, but it was a lifeless performance by the Bears in Waco in that 31-3 loss. If you couldn't get your defense off the field against Kansas State, you allowed the Wildcats 30 first downs in that game. I know that this is a prime letdown situation for TCU, and I realize, of course, they've already wrapped up their berth to play in the Big 12 championship game. But this TCU team continually gets undervalued by the odds makers. We've talked about it repeatedly this season, and you nailed it right on the head. 2.5-point favorite. Why? Because we're going to see suddenly Baylor revert to their 2021 form? I don't think so. I'm going to go with the Horned Frogs here. Dirt cheap price, and I don't see how you can not take advantage of it. By the way, guys, let me just remind you, if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, do so. It's right there at the bottom of the screen. That way you'll never miss another episode of the regular season shows that Rick and I do. And, of course, there are going to be only, I think, 137 bowl games that we'll be previewing as well. Yeah, I mean, listen, they had, me and you, we can have the Rick and Al bowl game if we come up with, a potato chip manufacturer and a couple $100,000 to chip in, too. But also the NFL pregame show I do with Steve Budin, that's available each and every Wednesday night, too. So make sure you subscribe there at the bottom of the field. Next game, another one that has big postseason implications in terms of the Big 12 because Texas lost, because West Virginia Baylor lost. Kansas State sitting in the catbird seat, number 2 in the Big 12 at West Virginia. The Wildcats with the inside track if they win out to play TCU ultimately for the Big 12 championship. They are 7.5-point favorites in Morgantown this weekend.
Yeah, I gotta go with the K-State. I'll lay that 7.5 on the road. They can control their own destiny, like you said. And what a rematch that would be in that Big 12 title game, because when they played earlier in the year, I know you remember, the game went into overtime, but K-State was down to their third string quarterback already. And this kid, Will Howard, I'd keep him in there over Adrian Martinez anyway. The last couple of weeks he's had. But yeah, really good. Last week he was 12 of 22, 138. Well, no, that was the kid they held from West Virginia because West Virginia didn't start their quarterback, JT Daniels, for ineffectiveness. They sat him on the bench, but I don't see anything for West Virginia. They fired the athletic director the other day. That only means that he's the one that hired Neil Brown, the head coach. So Brown's got to think, and he might also be out the door. And the win over Oklahoma is nice, Al, but this is one of the worst Oklahoma teams in 10, 15 years.
Well, you brought up Will Howard, who once again replaced an injured Adrian Martinez in the 31-3 win at Baylor. And this is the second time he's come off the bench to replace Adrian Martinez in a 3-game stretch. 19 for 27, 196 yards and 3 touchdowns last week in 3+ quarters of play. In relief for Martinez, 7 touchdowns. Not a bad body of work. He is going to start this game against West Virginia this week. We're doing this show here on Tuesday night, as we usually do. It was announced a couple of hours prior to us starting this recording that he is going to start. The interesting thing here is that they originally had planned to redshirt him this season. They are going to probably end up burning that red shirt because this is going to be the 4th game that he is going to appear in this season. But he is fine with it. The coaching staff is fine with it because they know what's at stake. And I'm with you. I mean, Adrian Martinez has had some nice games this year. But the fact is, the way Howard is playing, his body of work, although brief, has been outstanding this season. 9 touchdowns, 707 yards, 1 interception, 63% completions. With the way he's throwing the ball, with the way Deuce Vaughn, who, again, along with Miller out of TCU and Robinson out of Texas, that trio, the top 3 backs in the Big 12, that is a powerful punch for Kansas State offensively. And I've got to go with them here. Of course, Kansas State snapped a 5-game series losing streak with last year's 34-17 win in Manhattan. I will point out one little thing. I don't think it's too much of a concern, but Kansas State did lose their second leading tackler and their best defensive back player, their starting strong safety, Kobe Savage, who had 3 interceptions, to an injury in the win last week. But again, Kansas State, 7.5 points. I don't see any letdown here. At 7.5, I'm naturally buying down the half point. I also think Kansas State is one of those teams in a perfect teaser situation that I would look forward to because I just don't see this West Virginia team rising to the occasion and winning this game because, hell, beating Oklahoma, they had lost their previous 3 games anyway. They're just not a good team.
No, I agree with you. The Mountaineers have won the last 3 at home against Kansas State. So we got some revenge for Kansas State coming into Morgantown, and they know they're there for a job. They can control their own destiny, get to the Big 12 title game, which is very important to them, and try and seek revenge against TCU. But, I don't think I can't see, Al, how we could take West Virginia. I just don't see it. Not
even if you paid me. And here's the scary part. We talk about 2 exciting teams from the Big 12, and now we're going to talk about 2 teams that are going to set the evolution of offensive football back by at least 70 or 80 years when we talk about these 2 Big 10 teams, Minnesota hosting Iowa. Could this perhaps be the most boring game on this week's schedule? I mean, Iowa beat Wisconsin last week 24-10 at home. And Iowa had 146 total yards in offense, which is only fitting because out of 131 FBS teams, there are 129 in total offense this year. I mean, great. They won their third straight game. They're moved into a tie for the Big Ten West League with Illinois and Purdue and Minnesota. If they win out, they could advance to the Big Ten championship game. Oh, my God, these two teams. I mean, you look at the total, it's 32.5 points. 32.5 points. I mean, there are high school teams in Texas that score 32.5 points in the first quarter.
Yeah. Well, Al, as bad as this game sounds to us, which it does, it still has major implications on who's going to come out of that West of the Big Ten, like you said, with the four-way tie. I don't know. You got Iowa's good defense against one of the top running backs, let alone in the league, but in the country, in Ibrahim, who I think has now rushed for over 18 straight 100-yard games, setting a record in the Big Ten. But this is a team, Al. I don't know. I'll tell you one thing though that we've discovered, Al. The visitor is 7-5 straight up, but 11-1 against the spread since 2008. And, going back to what you said, Al, the winner coming out, this is why the Big Ten needs to have the one division, because whoever one of these teams is going to get it's the same thing that happened last year is going to happen again this year. Michigan and Iowa last year, Michigan rolled them 42-3, something I'm pretty sure that's what the score was. So whoever you're getting out of the East is going to roll one of these teams again. It's that simple. Where you could have a nice Ohio State rematch. Wouldn't that be great on that, on that Fox slot for the Big Ten championship? But this is what you're going to get. And I don't know, Al, out of the four of them, who is better? Minnesota, Iowa, Purdue, or Wisconsin? I don't know. I don't have faith in any of them. Yeah.
They're all average 500 teams. And the division thing is so antiquated. The commissioners, I don't know why they insist on still having it. The Pac-12 did away with it. The Big 12 did away with it. It's the way to go. Listen, now, if you want to have it in, the SEC or something, great, by all means. But when you have the top echelon teams, like the top heavy teams in a conference like the Big 12, Big 10, and then you have the lower echelon, the basement teams like you do in the Big 10, it's ridiculous because it just devalues your championship game, because you're 100% right. Who wouldn't want to see Ohio State or Michigan or Penn State, for example, play a second time around? That's what's going to draw the crowd.
Could I ask you, Al, do you think the network would be concerned with having Ohio State and Michigan play on back-to-back weekends?
Oh, my God.
Is that one of their concerns? I don't know.
I think probably that is a little bit of a concern, because what happens if Ohio State beats the hell out of Michigan again, and then you have a repeat performance the following week? I mean, that's always a risk. But then again, do you really – I mean, how do you hype up, hey, Ohio State's going to play Iowa. Hey, that Kurt Ferentz defense is going to only hold Ohio State to 40 points instead of 50. But back to this game. One thing that you mentioned about the dog being the great play here, leaning toward Iowa. I always get. It's interesting with trends. You find me one trend here, I'll find you 7 trends the other side. Iowa has won 13 straight games in the month of November. But, I look at Minnesota here, and I will give them some props because they beat Northwestern, big deal, 31-3, and that was their third straight win. But then again, the 2 previous wins were against Rutgers and Nebraska, again, 2 bottom cellar dwellers in the Big Ten. They're going to give a freshman quarterback whose name I am not about to try to pronounce. His first start was last week. His second one's this week. Last week against Northwestern, 7 for 13, 64 yards. So that under is looking even better. But they did have a time of possession of 40 minutes and 22 seconds against Northwestern. And this game is all going to come down to what you pointed out earlier. Can Iowa stop Minnesota from running the ball? And Iowa's already played the 2 best running teams, 2 strong running teams in the Big Ten. And that's Illinois' Chase Brown ran for 146 yards. Michigan's Blake Corum ran for 133 yards. Illinois and Michigan, both with better passing attacks, won those games. Minnesota doesn't have a passing attack. So I lean a little toward Minnesota laying the 3 points, but Yeah, my God, you couldn't pay me to watch the game, let alone bet on it. But I mean, we had to preview another game. So what the hell? I said, let's do this game, and that leads us to a game that might be just as bad, but it'll be a blowout perhaps. Georgia minus 22.5 at Kentucky. The Bulldogs certainly didn't have any letdown after beating up Tennessee last week, but my God, has Kentucky collapsed?
Al, before we go any further, if I could just touch on one point that you made, which was a great point in the Minnesota-Iowa game. I don't know how they're going to throw with that quarterback. This Iowa defense, if anything, you got to give them credit. They do have a strong defense, and led by Jack Campbell, the leading tackler in the Big Ten. I think, that's going to be the difference in that game. So I will take Iowa and the 3.5 points in that game in a low-scoring game. And you said that 32, and we don't know what the weather could be like in Minnesota, But if that's what it is, Al, 32, that's the total.
Yeah.
Wow.
32.5.
I wouldn't be scared to play that under. I mean, that's I don't know how they're going to score. I don't, they won last week, Iowa, but they only had 146 yards of total offense. The defense set everything up for them.
That's what I mean. I mean, when you think about Iowa State earlier this year, I mean, you could see a 13-10 game. You could see, I mean, listen, this could be 17-13 and you'd still cash with the under.
Yeah. Now, I know you said about Georgia, Kentucky. We had no doubt last week, and we were neither of us cared about the 16.5 points. And we got that cover easy with Georgia against Mississippi State. This week, the 22, Al, scares me a little. I mean, but the way Kentucky played last week against Vanderbilt, oh my God, Al, 26 straight losses for Vanderbilt in the conference, and they get their first one on the road at Kentucky. Lucky they had the kid, the good running back, because he was all their offense. And I am so disappointed with Will Levis, because that's all you're going to hear in April. There's Will Levis. Show me the highlights from the Vanderbilt game, not when they played the 1AA school back early in the season. That's what I want to see, because he was just, he was bad. That whole offense was bad. And Vandy, 264 yards rushing now. What's that Georgia offense going to do to them? I'll lay the 24. I'll lay the 22 points again. That Georgia's rolling now. They're rolling.
Well, you look at Will Levis, his last 3 games, which again, 44-6 loss at Tennessee, 21-17 miraculous win against Missouri, and a 24-21 home loss to Vandy. In that 3-game stretch, 40 for 69, 377 yards, 3 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and 14 sacks. And that last number is the most significant. Kentucky came into the season. They had to replace 3 offensive line starters from last year's 10-3 squad. And you've seen what has happened. Levis has been sacked 34 times this season. And they haven't even played, Georgia. Georgia has 11 sacks in the last 3 games. Had how many? 6 sacks in the Tennessee game. And you look at what a mess they made of Hendon Hooker's campaign for the Heisman in that one game alone. Just imagine what they're going to do to Will Levis here. The offense for Kentucky, 6 consecutive games, 21 points or less. Only one time this season has Kentucky managed to accumulate more than 400 total yards of offense. And that was in the game against Tennessee, which they were never really in. It was really a garbage time performance. Yeah. And they only scored 6 total points in that game. They're talking about in Lexington, where this game last week, the game against Vanderbilt, ranks in terms of the worst games and performances in Mark Stoops' career at the helm of the Wildcats. Coming into the season, Mark Stoops was one of these coaches that was climbing up the mountain. He was being considered, would he be the next coach of Florida before Napier got the job? Where was his next stop going to be if he left Lexington? He's got a major rebuilding job to do at Kentucky because nothing has gone right for him in the Bluegrass State this season. It's there's no chance. Again, not one of my games that I would particularly care for, but Georgia 22.5 points. I think if you play it, there's only one way to play that game. This next game is kind of interesting. Oregon, everybody was saying, my God, after that opening season loss to Georgia, the Ducks were flying. I just realized what I did there. It was not meant to be that way. But anyway, the Ducks were flying. Everything looked good. They were a possible college football playoff contender. And then last week, Michael Penix and Washington just destroyed them defensively. But more importantly, Bo Nix suffers an injury, ankle, knee. We're not exactly sure because, of course, nobody wants to comment on injuries. And he leaves the game late, comes back in for the final series, unable to guide them to the comeback win. So they lose that game, watch their winning streak, and their college football playoff chances go kaput. Now they're taking on Utah. You know what Utah did to them last season, second to last game of the season, beat the hell out of them, cost them a chance to go to the Pac-12 championship game. Then they meet later in the postseason. It was the Rose Bowl, beat the hell out of them again. I had them both times, the Utes last season. And I can tell you that in yesterday's press conference, Dan Lanning, as most coaches do with their coach speak, would not comment on the injury status of Bo Nix or the two offensive linemen, one guard and one tackle, that also got hurt in this week's game. So can't tell you here on Tuesday night whether or not they're going to play. But I think Oregon's going to have their hands full here, even as a 3-point favorite against a Utah team that has really been playing well here of late.
Yeah, this was last year, like you said, Utah just physically manhandled that Oregon, both on the lines of scrimmage, but I don't know, Al, what the outcome's going to be this year. It all depends, like you said, on Bo Nix. They got the two good quarterbacks. You got Nix for Oregon and Cam Rising for Utah. The thing that surprised me last week that kind of gave that game to Washington or put them in a good position to win was when it was 4th and 1 on their side of the 50, and they had the backup quarterback in it. They went for it on 4th and 1. Washington stuffed them, took the ball down. I believe went ahead with the score for the winning score. So right there, that was a coaching decision. I mean, they could have punted and put Washington in the hole at that time. So I don't know, Al, but we do know that there is a 4-way tie for second place in the Pac-12. Everybody chasing Southern Cal. Utah dominated them last year in both meetings, 76-17. They outscored Oregon. I'm gonna take Oregon at home. I think the line's small. I think they got the revenge and get that bad taste out of their mouth from last week with Washington. I'm gonna, again, not in love with this game, but I'm gonna take Oregon and see what they can come up with this week, and hopefully that Bo Nix is playing. So, like you said, Al, they're gonna have to keep an eye on his status as we move through the week.
Well, the one reason that I like Utah is Tavian Thomas, I guess is how you pronounce his name, Tavian Thomas, who was the leading ground gainer last year for Utah. I think he also scored, it was either 18 or 21 touchdowns rushing a year ago for Utah. Started the season as their lead back, then was in and out of the lineup, missed a couple of games, wasn't in the doghouse, but it was never really publicly disclosed why he wasn't playing, but there were some issues, personal issues that were going on, but he had to work his way back into the lineup. A couple of weeks ago, he emerged back off the bench because there were some injuries. And then last week, he started against Stanford, a career high 180 yards on 22 carries. He is the difference maker to me when I look at this Utah offense, because yes, Cam Rising is good, but when Rising and Thomas are both there, that is the difference. And when Thomas was rolling at the end of last season, that's what made Utah so damn dangerous. And now you've got Thomas with fresh legs at the end of the season. And I saw how that Oregon defense continually broke down last week against Washington. I saw what Michael Penix did against them. And Washington really isn't a team that runs the ball that well. So I think that you can certainly go ahead and take Utah in this situation. So I like the Utes. And I'll tell you what, if Nix plays, I think the over is in doubt too, because it's 61.5 points. I don't see these teams stopping each other.
Yeah. And Al, but realize that Oregon's number one in total offense, averaging about 528 a game. Utah tops the Pac-12 in total defense at 327. So it'll be a nice contrast to see, who's gonna bend first. Like I said, I'll take Oregon laying the small number at home, thinking they'll bounce back, and try and at least get into that Pac-12 championship.
And this is one of the situations, guys, we've talked about it many times. We're recording this on Tuesday night. You've got to make yourself aware of what the injury reports are as the week progresses, because if you think the coaches are going to tell you on Monday and Tuesday in their press conferences, you are sorely mistaken. Okay, guys, before we get to the last game, just a quick reminder, you can get Rick's best bet, whatever the hell it is. He's not going to tell me because I'll probably jinx him. Listen, my best bet last Saturday was Mississippi State, what was my best bet? LSU. I want to forget my best bet. Trust me. It was LSU. Thank God I bought down the half point because at 3.5, they only won by 3.
Yeah.
It was one of my few good plays in the last couple of weeks. Let me tell you that. We won't go any further. But when your push is your best play in the past couple of weeks, that's scary. That's how bad things have been going. But listen, if you want to find out what Rick's latest best bet is, again, 9-1 on Saturdays this college football season, you can get his best bet and all the plays from all the handicappers at the site using the one-day free all-access pass. The normal price would be $109. You get it for free. If you don't want Saturday's plays, you can get Sunday's plays. The choice is yours. Check it out now, the one-day free all-access pass over at thesportsadvisors.com. That brings us to the game that would have been a hell of a lot better if UCLA did not get upset by Arizona last week, but it's UCLA against USC. And USC did beat up Colorado, but USC, a costly injury in the process as their top back, a guy we've talked about many times, Travis Dye, season-ending, I believe it was a knee injury in that contest.
Yeah, it's a shame, Al. Over 800 yards rushing. He's the kid that transferred from Oregon. He was their ground game, Al, and he's good. That's a shame. Al, right off the bat, I'm looking at the over. I'm going to look at the over at this game. I think, did you say it might be 75?
75 and a half.
You know what, Al? The last 4 games, the totals that the two teams scored, 95, 81, 87, and 61. And let me tell you, the defenses this year haven't got any better from the last couple of years, UCLA or USC's. I mean, USC's has played better than last year, but they got 62 rolled up on them last year. The Bruins put on them 62. But this year, it's a different USC team that can score. So I wouldn't be surprised, Al, if this is 40-35, 46-40, something like that. I think there's going to be a lot of points because both teams, as we know, Al, have very talented players on the offensive side of the ball. You know, with Zach Charbonnet, who leads the Pac-12 in rushing. You got the good quarterback. Then you got USC's quarterback, Caleb Williams, who's probably up for the Heisman. One of the 5 or so up for the Heisman Trophy. And the good wide receivers, I expect a high-scoring game. And they've all scored, Al, I think, every game. USC has scored 40 points in a game, every game except twice this season. UCLA scored less than 40 in a game only 3 times. So, the over, I think the line's small. I think UCC's laying 1.5. If I had to, Al, I might take UCLA at home to bounce back from that win. But points are going to be up and down. And the last thing, Al, is they couldn't stop Arizona's quarterback last week, UCLA, the kid Deloria, who was just on fire. So I don't know how they're going to stop Caleb Williams, but the loss of Travis Dye is going to hurt that running game.
And it takes away the balance that USC had developed this season. So without an effective ground game, that means USC is going to throw the ball even more, which means time of possession and the clock is going to not be running as much, which means time of possession is going to favor USC even more, which means more offensive possessions, because if I didn't phrase that the correct way, means that you're going to have more time on the clock is what I mean. So more chances for putting points on the board. I like UCLA as well. I think the home environment is going to be crazy for this game. For the past 3, 4, 5 years, they have been blocking off most of the top parts of the stadium and layering it with blue tarps. We're talking about a sellout here. That's the anticipation for this game. We're talking about almost 17,000 UCLA students. That's a record in recent years in terms of attending this game. USC, I think, is going to have, I saw something like they sold 7,000 tickets, their allotment. So it's going to be a crazy environment. You've got 2 offensive minds in college football. Chip Kelly and Lincoln Riley are going to be pulling out all the stops. I agree with you. I mean, this game, it's not going to be SMU Houston crazy, okay? But yeah, 45-40. Well, we're already 10 points over. There's no doubts about that. USC, I've said this many times when I was backing them early in the season. Lincoln Riley was blessed with a plethora of talent from the transfer portal. He didn't get any help on the defensive side. And that Alex Grinch defense, it is awful. UCLA's defense is maybe just a tad bit better. I do like the offensive balance that UCLA has, which is why I like them to win this game. But I would say the total is definitely the best way to go, and I would lean toward UCLA in that one too. But what an exciting game it's going to be to watch. Yeah. And it's just a shame that these two teams are, going to abandon that conference when you've really got this year probably the best balance you've had in that conference in years. When you think about how Washington State and Washington are coming up, Oregon is reloaded, Utah is strong again, and now for the first time in years, you've got UCLA and USC. When's the last time you had 6 teams from that conference that are really, really good?
Yeah, it's really good for the Pac-12 to have some stake in possibly the Final Four this year, because I think, Al, over the years, they've only ever had one team in the Final Four since they started the CFP. I think that was Washington. I don't know how long back, but I'm pretty sure it was Washington. And, Al, I think on the other hand, maybe I'm being a little greedy rooting for UCLA or picking them, because I would just like to see that whole Pac-12 be thrown upside down, because then you would give USC with 2 losses. UCLA would have 2 losses. Then you would also have Utah or Oregon. They would be involved. They would be involved with it. I think Washington might even be involved with it if they win out. So it could really get crazy. Always like to see a little chaos. And I'm sure the Pac-12, the Pac-12 wouldn't like it, because the CFP is not going to take a 2-loss team. We know that.
Listen, you've already jinxed Tulane. You put the kibosh on James Madison earlier. Let's not put the hex on all these Pac-12 teams. I mean, you're just like the hex doctor here. But anyway, listen, guys. One more thing, Al. Getting back to our earlier team, which is our new team now, U.Conn. Okay, they've won 7 straight against the spread coming into Saturday's game. It's all over. Don't bet the Huskies, guys. I'm telling you, go the other way. That is the kiss of death from Rick Torino. You've heard it here first. The kiss of death. I'm telling you, James Madison earlier this year, he tells me on one of these shows, if you didn't watch, he says, "Hey, Al, do you know what team is winning has the best spread record in all of college football? James Madison. Next week, they lose outright." I'm telling you, kiss of death. Over, done with. Okay. Any other pearls of wisdom?
I think I'm good for this week.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try to win on Saturday. I'm going to try something different. I'm overdue. I'm like, I'm overdue by 9 months. But anyway, listen, that'll do it for this week.
I'm looking at a real nice one for Saturday, a real nice one.
Yeah, and I know you're not going to give me any heads up on it either.
No.
I'll be like the customers. I'll be the first one to find out when the customers do. But anyway, guys, that'll do it for this week's show. Remember, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. And for Rick Torino, I am Al DeMarco. We wish you well and talk to you next week here from thesportsadvisors.com.